Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Sinister Dollmaker. It was a cold, blustery evening on the Isle of Wight, and Holly Arnold could feel the chill in her bones as she made her way up the narrow, winding path toward an old, crumbling workshop perched on a cliff. The locals never spoke of it, and those who did only whispered. The dollmaker's workshop had been abandoned for nearly a century, yet its reputation lingered like a curse. Rumors told of a reclusive dollmaker, Rasmus Claymore, who once lived in that very workshop. Claymore was known for crafting exquisite dolls, so lifelike that they seemed to watch you with glassy eyes. His business flourished, but his downfall came as whispers of dark practices began to spread. People claimed he cursed his dolls with twisted souls, that they were more than mere wood and porcelain. Holly, a curious soul with a fascination for the macabre, had been drawn to the workshop for as long as she could remember. On the day she inherited her grandmother's old journal, she learned why. The journal chronicled strange occurrences involving Claymore's dolls. Her great-grandmother, Margaret Arnold, had been a prominent figure in the village until she suddenly vanished without a trace. The last entry in the journal hinted at the mysterious visit to Erasmus Claymore's workshop. Holly knew the answers to the family mystery lay within those walls. As she approached the weather-beaten door, Holly's breath fogged in the air. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of her ancestors' secrets pressing down on her shoulders. With a shaky hand, she pushed the door open. The interior of the workshop was preserved, though covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. Shelves lined with unfinished dolls stared down at her, their tiny mouths agape, eyes gleaming with an eerie sheen in the dim light. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind her, making Holly jump. She cursed under her breath and took a deep breath to steady herself. "Nothing to be afraid of," she whispered. The workshop smelled of age, of wood and decay. But there was something else, something faint, something almost alive. Holly began to explore, her fingers brushing over the intricate carvings of the dolls' faces. She noticed one particular doll, standing upright on a table in the center of the room. It was different from the others, with long, flowing black hair, a porcelain face, and an expression of cold disdain. Its eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to follow her every move. Holly could almost hear it whispering her name. She shivered, but couldn't tear her gaze away. "What happened to you?" she murmured. Suddenly, a creaking sound echoed through the room. Holly spun around, eyes wide. The other dolls on the shelves began to stir. Slowly, their heads turned in unison, fixing her with their soulless gazes. She stumbled backward, her heart pounding. "Leave," a voice rasped from the shadows, but Holly couldn't see where it came from. It sounded like a child, but far too old, far too knowing. Her throat tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She felt a sudden urge to run, to get out of the workshop before something terrible happened. But her feet felt like lead, and an invisible force seemed to root her to the spot. From the far corner of the workshop, a figure emerged tall, with a gaunt, deathly pale face. His hands were worn and covered in grime, the hands of a craftsman. Erasmus Claymore. "I see you've come for answers." Claymore's voice was a hoarse whisper. "But there is a price for knowledge," Holly tried to speak. Claymore moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "With the dolls, they were wronged, and so was I, betrayed, abandoned, forgotten. Now they live, and they seek justice." Holly could feel the oppressive weight of the doll stairs, each one moving slightly. She stepped back, but it was too late. The doll with black hair, the one at the center of the room, suddenly sprang to life. Its tiny hand reached out, and though it looked fragile, it gripped Holly's wrist with an iron strength. "That they remember your bloodline. Your great-grandmother, Margaret, came here seeking power. She sought to control what she did not understand. Margaret had been obsessed with gaining influence in the village, and Claymore's craft had intrigued her. But something had gone horribly wrong. You..." Holly managed to gasp, struggling to pull away from the doll's vice-like grip. "Oh no. The dolls did. She made promises she didn't keep, and they never forget." The other dolls began to move closer. Holly tugged her arm free, but as she did, the black-haired doll let out a high-pitched scream. The sound was not human, it was the wail of something unnatural, something born of fury and betrayal. The dolls surged forward, climbing up her legs, their cold hands grabbing at her clothes, her skin. Holly shrieked, thrashing to shake them off, but they clung to her, their eyes glowing with malicious intent. "You must atone for her sins." Claymore's voice was low, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Only then will they rest." The black-haired doll climbed up to her shoulder. Holly could feel her strength draining, the weight of her great-grandmother's mistakes bearing down on her. With a sudden surge of will, she grabbed the nearest object, a rusty chisel from the workbench, and swung it wildly. She struck the doll, shattering its porcelain face. It screeched in agony, but the others continued their relentless assault. Desperate, Holly spun around and knocked over a shelf of unfinished dolls. Their lifeless bodies stumbled to the floor, but as soon as they hit the ground, they began to twitch, rising to join the fray. Holly's vision blurred, her limbs growing heavier with each passing moment. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls shrinking, the dolls multiplying. "Let me go," she screamed. Claymore's laugh echoed through the workshop as the dolls dragged her to the floor. "This is your legacy, Holly Arnold. The sins of the past cannot be undone," as the dolls piled on top of her, their glass eyes gleaming with vengeance. The family curse had come full circle. And in the forgotten workshop on the Isle of Wight, the dolls finally found their justice. Some say that on stormy nights, you can still hear the sound of Holly Arnold's screams carried on the wind, and the faint, echoing laughter of the dolls that claimed her soul. Days turned into weeks, and the residents of the Isle of Wight began to whisper about Holly Arnold's disappearance. The local authorities searched the island, but no trace of her was ever found. The workshop, long shunned by the locals, was assumed to be another dead end. No one dared set foot inside to investigate, the sinister reputation of the Dollmaker's workshop keeping them away. But the island didn't remain quiet for long. One evening, in a small seaside village of Ventnor, strange things began to happen. Children complained of hearing soft tapping at their windows at night. When they looked, they swore they saw tiny figures scurrying away, always out of sight before an adult could check. Parents dismissed the stories as childish imagination, but it wasn't long before the adults started hearing the same sounds, soft, methodical, almost like footsteps. Then came the disappearances. It started with minor things, trinkets, family heirlooms, dolls from children's bedrooms vanishing without a trace. But soon, pets began to go missing. Dogs, cats, even a flock of sheep disappeared from a farmer's field overnight. The village was in an uproar, but no one could explain what was happening. One foggy morning, Sarah Grayson, an elderly woman who lived alone in a house near the woods, was found dead. Her neighbors discovered her body lying on the floor of her home, her face twisted in terror. Oddly, nothing appeared to have been stolen, except for one thing, the porcelain doll that had sat on her mantelpiece for over 30 years. Whispers spread through the village. Some said they had seen small, shadowy figures moving through the mist on the nights the strange occurrences took place. Others claimed the dolls were coming to life, but no one believed them, not yet. It wasn't until Emma Thompson, a local school teacher, disappeared that the village reached its breaking point. She had been last seen walking home after dark, her lantern flickering in the wind. When search parties combed the area, they found only her lantern, lying shattered near the cliffside road leading to the old dollmaker's workshop. The workshop was a place of fear, but now it became something more, a symbol of dread, of something lurking just beneath the surface of the island's peaceful facade. The villagers knew something had to be done, and reluctantly, a group of men gathered to go to the workshop, determined to find out if the old legend had anything to do with the strange events. They arrived at the crumbling building just as the sun began to set, the last light casting long, eerie shadows. The air was still, unnervingly quiet. The men approached the door, hesitant as though the very walls were watching them. One of them, Thomas, a burly fisherman with a reputation for bravery, stepped forward and knocked. Nothing happened. The men exchanged glances. "We need to go inside," Thomas said. "If Holly went in there and didn't come back, maybe she's still..." Suddenly, the men froze. Inside, the workshop looked untouched by time. Dust lay thick on the floor, but it was the eerie stillness that made their skin crawl. The dolls sat on their shelves, their lifeless eyes seeming to follow the men as they stepped cautiously inside. "Let's split up," one of the men suggested. But before they could act, a voice echoed through the room, a soft, girlish giggle. The men froze, eyes wide, staring at each other in disbelief. Thomas whispered, gripping the handle of a lantern tightly. Without warning, one of the dolls toppled from a shelf, landing on the floor with a sharp crack. The men backed away as the doll's head rolled to the side, its painted eyes now fixated on them, a sinister grin spreading across its porcelain face. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. Panic set in. The men rushed toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room seemed to close in on them, the doll's lifeless eyes now glowing faintly in the dim light. The giggle returned, this time louder, and then footsteps. Tiny footsteps. From the shadows, dozens of dolls emerged. Their eyes glinted, and their once stiff limbs moved with fluid, a natural grace. The men backed up, horrified, as the dolls advanced. Thomas shouted, his voice cracking. A low, familiar voice answered from the darkness. "It's Justice." The men turned to see Holly standing in the corner of the room, her face pale and gaunt. She looked different, almost as if something had drained the life from her, leaving only a shell behind. Thomas gasped. What happened to you?" Holly stepped forward. They needed someone to guide them. Someone who understood the pain of being forgotten, just like me. The men stared in horror as Holly raised her hand. Tiny hands grabbed at their legs, climbing with unnatural speed. Screams filled the air as the dolls swarmed, their porcelain faces grinning with malevolent glee. Within moments, the workshop was silent once more. When the villagers came looking for the men the next morning, all they found were their lanterns, discarded in the dirt outside the workshop. No one dared to enter. And after that night, the strange occurrences in the village stopped, but the island was never the same. The dollmaker's workshop remained standing, a silent sentinel on the cliffside, its doors sealed forever by the terror it housed within. Some say that, on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint sound of giggles and footsteps echoing through the wind as the dolls continue to seek revenge. And at the center of it all, Holly Arnold stands, forever bound to the cursed creations of Erasmus Claymore, guardian of their vengeance, lost to the darkness of the past. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had a great day.